What if the one destined to heal your broken world is the one whose touch could destroy you both? Tonight, we dive into a story where love doesn't conquer all. It transforms everything. Dr. Lyra Chen thought she understood the language of plants, the poetry of extinct species blooming under her careful hands. She had no idea her greenhouse sat on the thin veil between worlds, or that a scarred lord from the autumn court had been watching over her garden, and her, for decades. When an ancient blight begins devouring both the human and fey realms, Lyra discovers that every healing spell she casts binds her life more tightly to Kale's. But he's harboring a curse that turns love into poison, hope into ash. Together, they must save the last remnants of ancient magic, even if it means losing themselves in the process. If you're ready to feel every impossible choice, every forbidden touch, every moment when love becomes both salvation and damnation, hit subscribe and let the story begin. The crash jolted Dr. Lyra Chen from dreams of flowering meadows into the stark reality of her bedroom at 3:17 a.m. Not the sharp, clean break of a dropped mug, but the soft, musical tinkling of her greenhouse glass, surrendering to something impossible. She pressed bare feet to cold hardwood, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird sensing a storm. "Not the greenhouse," she whispered to the darkness. "Please, not my life's work." The October air bit through her thin nightgown as she ran across the dew-soaked grass, but the cold that met her at the greenhouse door was different, ancient, wild, tinged with the metallic taste of dying magic. Inside, her carefully cultivated extinct species were dissolving, not wilting, not browning, dissolving. Leaves crumbled into golden ash that danced upward like reverse snow, and the sight hit her harder than any physical blow. 30 years! She breathed, watching the ghost orchid she'd spent 5 years coaxing to bloom transform into glittering dust. 30 years of research, and it's all just gone. But she wasn't alone. A figure knelt among her dying plants, broad shoulders, dark hair that caught the moonlight, and hands that moved with desperate tenderness despite the fresh cuts covering his knuckles. He was whispering in a language that made the air shimmer, each word dripping with grief so profound it made her chest ache. When he looked up, his eyes burned like liquid amber, and tears traced silver paths down a face marked by scars that spoke of centuries, not decades. "I'm sorry." His voice was smoke and velvet, broken glass wrapped in silk. "I tried to shield this place, tried to keep the blight from reaching through, but..." His gaze swept over the devastation, and his shoulders sagged with the weight of failure. "I've been protecting this garden, protecting you for 30 years, and I've failed." Lyra's scientific mind scrambled for rational explanations, even as something deeper, something that lived in her bones and dreamed in the language of root systems, recognized him. "You're trespassing," she said, but the words felt hollow. How do you accuse someone of trespassing when they look at your life's work with the grief of a parent mourning a child? "I know how this looks." He rose slowly, careful not to make sudden movements, like a wild animal afraid of spooking her. "A stranger in your greenhouse, speaking impossible things." But Lyra, Dr. Chen, the way he said her name was reverent, familiar, as if he'd been practicing it for decades. "The plants dying around us aren't from your world. They never were." She took a step back, her bare heel catching on a shard of glass. The sharp pain grounded her, reminded her this was real, not some fever dream brought on by too many late nights in the lab. "My world? What are you talking about? These are extinct species I've been cultivating for 15 years, 7 months, and 12 days. His voice was quiet, certain. "Since you defended your dissertation on botanical resurrection techniques. Since you inherited this property from your grandmother. Since you planted your first impossible seed in soil that exists in the space between realms." The precision of his knowledge should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "How could you possibly know?" "Because I've been watching." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent. Pine sap and wild honey, storm clouds and something indefinably green. Every morning when you whisper encouragement to seedlings that shouldn't exist. Every night when you fall asleep, reading to them from botanical journals. I've been the shadow at the edge of your garden, the reason your impossible plants thrived when they should have withered. Around them, the golden ash continued its upward dance, and where it touched the broken glass, the shards dissolved too. What's happening to them? Her voice cracked. What's killing my plants? Our plants, he corrected gently. And it's called the withering blight. It devours the magic that lets impossible things bloom. He looked at his scarred hands with something like shame. And I fear I may have led it straight to your door. Show me. The words left Lyra's lips before her rational mind could stop them. If these plants aren't from my world, if you've been caring for them, if any of this is real, show me. Kyle, she somehow knew his name now, as if it had been whispered to her in dreams, reached for his coat pocket with hands that trembled slightly. What I'm about to show you will change everything you believe about reality, about your work, about yourself. He pulled out what looked like a seed, but it pulsed with its own internal light, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move independent of the source. A starbloom seed, he said, placing it carefully in her palm. The moment it touched her skin, the world exploded into sensation. She could hear the greenhouse breathing, feel the network of roots beneath the earth singing in harmonies that made her soul ache with beauty. They only grow in the overlap between worlds, and only for those with the gift to nurture impossible things. This is impossible, she whispered. But even as she said it, she was kneeling, pressing the seed into the soil with instincts older than thought. Her hands moved without conscious direction, and where she touched the earth, tiny flowers began to bloom. Not the slow, careful growth she was used to, but explosive, joyful eruption of life. You're doing it, Cale breathed, wonder replacing the grief in his voice. Lyra, you're actually doing it. Do you understand how rare this gift is? 1 in a million humans can even see a plant from the Fey realm, let alone make one grow. The starbloom unfurled petals that shifted color with each heartbeat, gold to silver to deep purple to colors that had no names in any human language. But as it reached full bloom, the golden ash began to swirl faster, and the flower's light started to dim. The blight, Cale said urgently. It's fighting back. Lyra, you need to let go. No. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk, and she pressed her hands deeper into the soil. I won't let it die. Not again. Not ever again. Power flowed through her. Not the careful, measured energy of scientific cultivation, but something wild and ancient and absolutely certain. The starbloom's light flared, pushing back the creeping darkness, and for a moment, just a moment, her entire greenhouse blazed with impossible life. Then the effort hit her like a physical blow. Blood ran from her nose and she collapsed backward, caught by arms that were strong and sure and heartbreakingly gentle. You magnificent, impossible woman, Cale murmured against her hair. Do you have any idea what you just did? You didn't just save one plant. You opened a doorway. Lyra's head pounded as Cale helped her to the old wicker chair her grandmother had placed in the greenhouse corner. I need answers, she said, pressing the heel of her palm against her forehead. Real answers, not cryptic poetry about doorways and impossible gifts. Your grandmother's journals, Kyle said quietly. Did she ever speak to you about family history? About why she chose to build this greenhouse here, in this specific location? Grandma Elena was eccentric, but she wasn't... Lyra trailed off, memory stirring. She used to say our family had green blood instead of red. I always thought it was just her way of talking about our love of gardening. Cale's laugh was soft and sad. Elena Moonwhisper was many things, but she was never just talking about gardening. At Lyra's sharp look, he continued. Moonwhisper was her name in the Fey courts before she chose love over immortality, before she became Lyra Chen and spent 60 years pretending to be fully human. The words hit like physical blows. That's impossible. My grandmother was born in Shanghai. She came to America as a war bride. She was completely, utterly human. She was half Fey, Cale said gently. Daughter of the Spring Court's ambassador to the human realm, and a Chinese botanist who saw through the veils between worlds. Elena inherited her father's gift for growing impossible things, and her mother's stubborn human heart. He gestured to the greenhouse around them. This isn't just built on a thin place between worlds, Lyra. Your grandmother made it a thin place. Every beam, every pane of glass, every inch of soil is saturated with intention and love and the kind of magic that only comes from choosing to build bridges instead of walls. Lyra's hands shook as she reached for the small wooden box her grandmother had left her, the one she'd never opened because it felt too final, too much like goodbye. Inside, Beneath letters written in multiple languages and pressed flowers that still held their color after decades, was a photograph. A young woman who looked exactly like Lyra stood beside a man with pointed ears and eyes like starlight, and behind them rose a garden that made her greenhouse look small and mundane. She knew, Lyra whispered. She knew what I was, what I could become. She prepared you for this moment your entire life, Kyle said. Every story she told you about plants having feelings, every time she made you promise to listen to what the earth was telling you, every seed she gave you that shouldn't have grown but did anyway. In the photograph, her grandmother was pregnant, hands curved protectively over her belly. My mother, Lyra realized. She never knew, did she? Grandma Elena hid it from everyone. Elena wanted your mother to choose her own path, free from the weight of Fey politics and ancient obligations. Kyle's voice was infinitely gentle. But you, Lyra, you were always meant to stand where two worlds meet. It's why the plants respond to you. It's why you can see me clearly when most humans would see only shadow and suggestion. And it's why the blight wants to kill me, she said, understanding flooding through her like cold water. The blight doesn't want to kill you, Kale said, his voice going dark. It wants to use you. Fey-human hybrid blood is the most powerful catalyst in either realm. In the wrong hands, your gift could tear holes between worlds large enough for armies to march through. You haven't told me who you really are. Lyra set down her grandmother's photograph with hands that barely trembled. You know my entire family history. You've been watching me for 15 years. And you speak of Fey courts like someone who's walked their halls. So, who are you, Kale? His smile was sharp as broken glass, beautiful as winter morning. I was Kyle Thornwick, second son of the Autumn Court, heir to the throne of falling leaves. Each word seemed to cost him something precious. 30 years ago, I was an arrogant prince who thought power was meant to be tested, boundaries meant to be pushed. I broke the seal of equilibrium between the realms, and in doing so, I released something that had been contained for good reason. The blight, Lyra said, pieces clicking into place. The first version of it, yes, smaller, contained to a single grove, but still devastating, still my fault. He looked at his scarred hands with something approaching hatred. The court's punishment was creative. They didn't exile me or strip my powers. They gave me a curse that would teach me the true cost of my actions. Lyra waited, sensing there was more, sensing that whatever came next would explain the careful distance he maintained, the way he'd caught her when she collapsed, but released her the moment she was steady. Everything I touch with love in my heart, I destroy, he said quietly. Not quickly, not obviously, but completely. The curse reads intention, emotion, the deepest truths of what I feel. Casual contact is safe. Helping a stranger, professional interaction, even friendly touch between people who don't mean much to each other. But love becomes poison, Lyra finished, understanding flooding through her. I've watched you for 15 years, Lyra. Watched you grow from a determined graduate student into a woman who whispers encouragement to plants and falls asleep reading them stories. Watched you choose solitude over relationships that felt incomplete. Watched you pour your heart into growing impossible things. His voice cracked slightly. I fell in love with your mind first, then your heart, then every small kindness you showed to living things that couldn't thank you for it. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge neither dared cross. But you can never touch me, Lyra said. Not the way you want to. Not the way... She stopped herself before admitting that she wanted it too. The night your grandmother died, I was there, Kale said. Hidden in the shadows, but there. She called out to me in the old language, made me promise to protect you. I wanted to comfort you so badly during those first months when you cried yourself to sleep in the greenhouse. But I knew what it would cost. How do you bear it? The question tore itself from her throat. Watching, wanting, never able to. Some days I don't, he admitted. Some days I think about walking into the sun, or throwing myself into the space between worlds. But then you'll discover something new. Or you'll laugh at something you're reading, or you'll celebrate when a particularly difficult plant finally blooms, and I remember that your happiness is worth any pain. They stood in silence, separated by 3 feet, and an unbreachable curse. There has to be a way, Lyra said finally. Magic made the curse. Magic can break it. The only way to break a curse of this magnitude is to fulfill its purpose. to truly understand the cost of my actions and prove that I've learned from them. Kale's smile was heartbreaking in its hopelessness. But how do you prove you understand love's value when you can never touch the person you love most? The dawn came too quickly, painting the devastated greenhouse in shades of gold that made the destruction look almost beautiful. Lyra had spent the remaining hours of darkness cataloging what could be saved, her scientific mind taking refuge in familiar routines, while her heart reeled from revelations that rewrote her entire existence. 17 species completely lost, she murmured, making notes in handwriting that shook only slightly. But the root systems, some of them are still intact. They can be regrown, Kyle said, from his careful distance by the door. He'd maintained exactly 7 feet between them since his confession, as if the curse might reach out and claim her through proximity alone. With your gift and the right conditions, even plants that seem completely gone can return from strong roots. Like hope, she said softly, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at the sentiment. But when she looked up, Kale's amber eyes held no mockery, only a warmth that made her chest ache. Exactly like hope. A sound from outside made them both freeze. Not the gentle rustle of wind through leaves, but the sharp crack of someone trying very hard to move silently through underbrush. Kale's entire body went rigid, and his hand moved to something hidden beneath his coat. "We have company. Should I be worried?" Lyra asked, but she was already reaching for the garden shears, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "Trust your instincts, little flower. They'll keep you alive when knowledge fails." "That depends on whether they're friend or foe," Kale said grimly. "And I haven't had many friends lately." The figure that stepped from the tree line was tall, androgynous, dressed in clothes that seemed to be cut from living shadow. Their skin was pale as winter moonlight, their hair the color of fresh snow, and when they smiled, Lyra glimpsed teeth just slightly too sharp to be human. "Hello, cousin," they said to Kale, their voice like wind chimes made of ice. "It's been, 30 years since you graced us with your presence?" "Nix," Kale breathed, and Lyra heard a dozen emotions in that single syllable. Surprise, wariness, hope, and something that might have been love. "What are you doing here? If the Winter Court finds out you've made contact with me, the Winter Court has bigger problems than tracking one black sheep family member," Nix said, but their eyes never left Lyra. "Though I have to say, Kale, your taste in mortals is intriguing." "I'm not exactly mortal," Lyra said, lifting her chin. Something about Nix's predatory grace made her want to show strength rather than vulnerability. "And I'm not anyone's anything. I'm Dr. Lyra Chen, and this is my greenhouse." Nix's laugh was like breaking crystal. "Oh, she's perfect." No wonder the blight responded so strongly to her awakening powers. They turned back to Kale. "You didn't tell her, did you? About what happened 3 nights ago when she first channeled real magic?" "What happened 3 nights ago?" Lyra demanded, looking between them. "The night you successfully propagated that ghost orchid cutting," Nix said when Kale remained silent. "The night you poured so much of your hybrid energy into making one impossible thing bloom. Your power signature lit up every magical monitoring system in 5 courts, dear cousin." The words hit Lyra like ice water. "You mean, they know about me? All of them?" "Oh, they more than know about you." Nix's smile turned sharp. "They're coming for you." "Explain," Lyra said, her voice carrying the authority she'd learned from years of managing difficult research teams and stubborn plant specimens. "Now. All of it." Nix raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the command in her tone. "Demanding. I like that in a hybrid." They settled gracefully onto an overturned pot, moving with liquid ease. "Very well. Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am Nix Shadowthorn, heir apparent to the Winter Court's throne, and—" their eyes flicked to Kale with something complex. "Kale's first cousin. The Winter Court," Kale said slowly, pieces falling into place. "You're Magnus's child. Magnus's disappointment," Nix corrected with a bitter smile. "The child who questions policy, who thinks perhaps eternal winter and absolute control aren't the answer to every political problem." Snow continued to fall around them, each flake perfect and sharp-edged. The child who's been secretly monitoring human-fae crossings for decades, trying to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophe that's now unfolding. Lyra hugged her arms around herself as the temperature continued to drop. "What catastrophe? The blight?" "The blight is just the beginning," Nix said. My father didn't create it by accident, Lyra. It was designed specifically to target hybrid magic, to consume the bridges between worlds, until the only connection left would be the one he controls. A door he could open and close at will, Kale said, understanding dawning in his voice. Complete control over trade, communication, migration between realms. Precisely. And it worked beautifully until 3 nights ago. Nyx gestured to Lyra with something approaching admiration. Until you channeled enough pure hybrid energy to not only resist the blight, but actively repair damage it had done. Do you understand what that means? It means I'm a threat to his plan, Lyra said quietly. It means you're the threat to his plan. The living proof that hybrid magic can overcome what he created. Nyx's expression grew serious. My father is gathering the summer court to his cause as we speak. They're planning to march through the remaining stable crossings and eliminate every human with Fey blood before they can become strong enough to challenge the blight. A genocide, Lyra breathed, dressed up as pest control. But yes, Nyx stood, snow swirling around them like living things. There are perhaps 50 hybrids left in the world, most of them unaware of their heritage. You're not just the strongest, Lyra. You're the only one with enough training and power to stand against what's coming. Kale stepped closer, stopping just short of the invisible boundary he'd set between them. How long do we have? The summer solstice is in 6 days, Nyx said, when the barriers between worlds are thinnest, when massive magical workings become possible. That's when they'll make their move. They looked directly at Lyra. Unless you're willing to make yours first. What kind of move? Lyra asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. The kind that requires you to claim your full inheritance, Nyx said softly. The kind that means accepting not just your grandmother's gift for growing impossible things, but your great-grandfather's crown. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Crown? Lyra repeated. Did you think Elena Moonwhisper was just any Fey noble who fell in love with a human? Nyx's smile was sharp as winter wind. She was the heir apparent to the Spring Court's throne, Lyra, which makes you third in line for a crown you never knew existed, and makes your hybrid magic strong enough to not just resist the blight, but to cure it entirely, Kale added, wonder and terror warring in his voice. If you're willing to risk everything you are to become everything you could be. I need to think, Lyra said, pressing her palms against her temples where a headache was building with each impossible revelation. I need to understand what I'm choosing between. Understanding is a luxury we don't have time for, Nyx said, but not unkindly. My father's forces are already mobilizing. Every hour you delay is an hour closer to... Stop. The word came out sharper than Lyra intended, backed by something that made the air around them shimmer. Both Nyx and Kale fell silent, and she realized she'd instinctively drawn power from the network of roots beneath their feet. I've spent my entire adult life making careful, considered decisions based on research and evidence. I won't start making impulsive choices now just because the stakes have gotten higher. She walked to the center of her ruined greenhouse, where the star bloom still pulsed with gentle light, despite the devastation around it. If I'm really some kind of hybrid princess with the power to cure magical plagues, then I need to understand exactly what that means. Not just what I could do, but what it would cost. Wise, Kale said softly. Your grandmother always said that power without wisdom was just another form of destruction. You knew her well, didn't you? Lyra knelt beside the star bloom, letting her fingers rest lightly on the soil around it. The moment she made contact, she could feel the vast network of life beneath the earth. Not just her greenhouse, but the entire forest, the streams, the small creatures that called this place home. Elena taught me more about the responsibility of power than my own court ever did, Kale admitted. She showed me that magic isn't about what you can take or control, but about what you choose to nurture and protect. Closing her eyes, Lyra let her consciousness sink deeper into the root network. Through it, she could sense things that had no name in any human science. The slow, patient thoughts of ancient trees, the quick, bright joy of spring flowers, the deep contentment of soil rich with life, and threading through it all, like silver wire through green cloth, the presence of other minds, other gardens, other people like her, scattered across the world, most of them sleeping, unaware. I can feel them, she whispered. The other hybrids. They're so alone. Most of them don't even know what they are. The network is real, Nyx said, their voice holding new respect. Most Fae can sense it, but few can actually connect to it the way you're doing now. You're not just touching the root system of your local area, you're accessing the world tree itself. Through the network, Lyra felt something else. A creeping wrongness, like an infection spreading through living tissue. The blight. She could trace its progress through the connections between worlds, see how it severed the links that allowed magic to flow freely. But she could also see something else, something that made hope bloom in her chest like spring returning after endless winter. "It's not unstoppable," she said, opening her eyes to meet Kale's gaze. "The blight. It's not some unstoppable force of nature. It's like a virus, but one that targets the connections between living things instead of the things themselves." Which means, Nyx leaned forward, their usual cool composure cracking slightly. Which means it can be healed the same way any infection can be healed, not by attacking it directly, but by strengthening the host's natural defenses. Lyra stood, dirt still clinging to her palms, power singing in her veins. "I don't need to become some kind of magical warrior princess to fight this thing. I need to become a healer on a scale no one's ever attempted before. The network," Kale breathed, understanding spreading across his features. "If you could use the world tree's root system to channel healing energy to every connected plant, every hybrid, every thin place between worlds, you could cure the blight not by destroying it, but by making its hosts too strong to be infected," Nyx finished. They were staring at Lyra with something approaching awe. It's brilliant. And completely insane. The amount of power required would be enough to kill me if I tried it alone, Lyra said calmly. "But I don't have to do it alone, do I?" She looked between Kale and Nyx, seeing the moment they understood. "A joining," Kale said quietly. "Not just of power, but of purpose. The 3 courts that matter most," Nyx added. "Autumn, winter, and spring, united in a single working. But joining our magic that completely, that intimately," Kale trailed off, color rising in his cheeks, "would override your curse," Lyra finished for him, her own pulse quickening, at least temporarily. "Long enough for us to work together. Long enough for you to touch me without fear," he said, wonder and hope and terror mingling in his voice. "Long enough for all of us to either save both worlds or die trying." "There's something else," Nyx said quietly, their usual sharp confidence replaced by something almost vulnerable. "Something you need to know before you decide whether to trust me completely." Lyra and Kale both turned to face them, and Lyra felt her newly awakened magical senses pick up waves of conflict rolling off the winter court air like cold fog. "What is it?" "I'm dying," Nyx said simply. "The blight, it doesn't just target hybrids. It also consumes Fae who've been exposed to too much hybrid magic over the years." They held up their hands, and Lyra could see thin lines of silver creeping up from their fingertips like frost patterns. "I've been secretly helping human-Fae couples for decades, teaching their children how to hide their abilities, how to survive in a world that wasn't ready for them." "How long do you have?" Kale's voice was rough with grief. "Days, maybe weeks. The silver reaches my heart, and..." Nyx shrugged with forced lightness. "Which means I have nothing left to lose, and everything to gain by helping you succeed." Lyra stared at the silver lines marking Nyx's pale skin, her scientific mind racing. "But if the blight is like an infection, if strengthening the host's defenses can cure it, then healing the network might heal me too," Nyx said. "Or it might kill me faster by forcing my system to process more magic than it can handle." Their smile was sharp as winter stars. "I told you it was insane." "Then we don't have a choice," Lyra said firmly. "We try. We risk everything, because the alternative is watching everything die slowly." Kyle stepped closer, stopping just outside the invisible boundary his curse created. "Lyra, if we do this, if we link our magic that completely, there's no guarantee we'll survive it. And even if we do, the joining might change us permanently. You could lose your humanity entirely, become fully Fae. And you could lose your curse permanently," she countered. "Finally be free to touch without destroying. Or I could lose control entirely, become something that destroys everything it touches, curse or no curse." They stared at each other across 3 feet of space that felt like an ocean. Lyra could see the war in his amber eyes, desperate hope battling with terror, love struggling against the fear of causing harm. "What does your heart tell you?" she asked softly. My heart tells me that 30 years of watching you from a distance, 30 years of loving you without being able to show it, is already a kind of death, he said. My heart tells me that if we fail, at least we'll fail together. And if we succeed, I'll finally be able to hold you while we save the world. The simple honesty of it took her breath away. Then let's succeed. Nyx cleared their throat. As touching as this is, we have practical concerns. The joining you're talking about isn't just a matter of holding hands and thinking happy thoughts. It requires a ritual space, specific components, and most importantly, a deep understanding of each other's magical signature. How deep? Lyra asked. Deep enough that you'll know each other's thoughts, feel each other's emotions, share each other's memories. Nyx's expression grew serious. There will be no secrets between you. No hidden shames, no private fears, no carefully guarded corners of the heart. Everything you are, everything you've ever been, will be open to the others. Lyra felt heat rise in her cheeks. Everything? The ritual requires complete trust, complete vulnerability, Kale said softly. It's why so few magical joinings of this magnitude have ever been attempted. Most people can't bear to be that known. Can you? Nyx asked, looking between them. Can you trust each other with not just your lives, but with every secret truth you've ever hidden? Lyra thought of her lonely childhood, of the sense of never quite fitting in anywhere, of the nights she'd spent talking to plants because they were easier to understand than people. She thought of her grandmother's death, of the fear that she'd never find someone who could love all the strange, impossible parts of her. Yes, she said. I can. And I can, Kyle said. I've been hiding for 30 years. I'm tired of shadows. Nyx nodded slowly. Then we begin tonight. The moon is dark, which is perfect for magic that requires death and rebirth. They smiled, and for the first time, it held warmth instead of winter's edge. Let's go save some worlds. The clearing Nyx led them to felt older than memory, older than the forest that surrounded it. Ancient stones formed a perfect circle, their surfaces carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. A nexus point, Kyle explained, as they arranged supplies in careful patterns, where the boundaries between all realms are thinnest. Your grandmother used to bring you here as a child, Nyx said to Lyra, their hands steady as they lit candles that burned with flames of different colors. She said you played with invisible friends who left flowers in your hair. I remember, Lyra said softly. The memory was hazy, dreamlike, but she could recall the sensation of other children laughing and dancing around her. Children who cast no shadows and smelled like honeysuckle and rain. They were Fae children, weren't they? Spring Court younglings, Kale confirmed. Your grandmother was preparing you, helping you grow comfortable with magic from both sides of your heritage. The ritual circle was almost complete now, 3 points of a triangle, each marked with objects that resonated with their respective courts. At Lyra's position, seeds and soil, a small cutting from the star bloom, water from the stream that ran behind her greenhouse. At Kale's, autumn leaves that never lost their color, a piece of amber containing a perfect prehistoric flower, wine the color of sunset. At Nyx's, a shard of winter ice that never melted, silver bells that chimed with no wind to move them, a crown of thorns carved from black obsidian. Before we begin, Nyx said, their voice taking on the formal cadence of ancient ritual, you must understand what will happen when the barriers between our minds fall. You will know each other as completely as you know yourselves. Every joy, every trauma, every moment of shame or glory, there will be nowhere to hide. Lyra looked across the circle at Kale, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the way moonlight caught in his dark hair. I'm not afraid of knowing you, she said. I'm afraid of you not being able to love me once you know all of me. His amber eyes were soft in the candlelight. Impossible, woman, he murmured. Don't you understand? I've been watching you for 15 years. I've seen you at your strongest and your weakest, your most gracious and your most stubborn. I know you already, Lyra Chen. The ritual will just let me tell you so. And I, Nyx said quietly, will finally have the chance to be known by people who won't judge me for choosing love over power, healing over conquest. They joined hands across the circle, Lyra's left hand in Kale's right, her right in Nyx's left, Nyx's right completing the connection with Kale. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into sensation. This is what Kale feels when he looks at me, Lyra realized with wonder, experiencing the depth of his love like sunlight flooding a dark room. And this is Nyx's loneliness, their desperate need to belong somewhere, to someone. This is Lyra's fierce protectiveness. Kale's thoughts merged with her own, her need to nurture everything beautiful and fragile in the world. And this is Nyx's courage, choosing to die fighting rather than live in submission. This is what family feels like. Nyx's mental voice was soft with wonder. This is what it means to be chosen, to be accepted completely. The sharing deepened, memories flowing between them like water finding its level. Lyra felt Kale's childhood in the autumn court, felt his joy in learning to shape living wood with his hands, felt the crushing weight of responsibility when he realized his mistake had cost lives. She felt Nyx's secret midnight flights to the human world, their careful work teaching hybrid children how to hide their gifts, their growing horror as the blight began to spread. And they felt her lonely childhood, her desperate need to understand the language plants seemed to speak, her grandmother's death and the overwhelming grief of losing the only person who understood her gifts. They felt her wonder when impossible seeds grew under her hands, her quiet contentment in the greenhouse in the early morning hours, when the world felt full of potential. Beautiful. Kale's voice was inside her mind now, warm as summer rain. You're so beautiful, inside and out. Brave, Nyx added. Braver than either of us, choosing to trust so completely. Strong enough, Lyra realized, power beginning to build around them like a living thing. Together, we're strong enough to do this. But even as the magic rose, she felt something else. A darkness moving at the edges of the nexus point, drawn by the massive magical working they were attempting. We have company, she said aloud. My father's forces, Nyx confirmed grimly. They've found us. Then we finish this now, Kale said, his mental voice fierce with determination. No matter what happens, we don't let them stop us from healing the blight. Together, Lyra agreed, drawing power from the World Tree's root network, feeling it amplify and purify as it passed through their joined consciousness. For everyone who can't fight for themselves, the healing energy began to flow, golden green light streaming out from their circle toward every corner of both realms. And in the distance, war cries echoed through the night. The first arrow whistled past Lyra's ear, its tip wreathed in flames that burned cold as winter stars. The healing energy faltered for a moment as her concentration broke, and she felt both Kale and Nyx's alarm spike through their mental connection. Don't stop. Nyx's voice was fierce in her mind. Whatever happens, don't stop the ritual. Through the trees came Magnus Shadowthorn's forces. Summer court soldiers in armor that gleamed like captured sunlight. Winter court warriors whose breath froze the air around them. And leading them all, a figure in a crown of black ice whose presence made the very stones of the Nexus circle crack with cold. My disappointing child. Magnus's voice carried across the clearing like a winter wind. Did you really think you could hide this pathetic rebellion from me? Father, Nyx replied aloud, never breaking the ritual connection, even as power crackled dangerously around them. Did you really think I would let you commit genocide without trying to stop you? Magnus stepped into the circle's edge, and the protective barriers Nyx had woven began to smoke and crack. He was tall, impossibly pale, with eyes like chips of glacial ice, and a smile that promised slow, creative death. Not genocide, child. Pruning. The weak branches must be cut away so the strong tree can survive. These weak branches are people, Lyra said, forcing herself to keep channeling healing energy even as her hands shook. Through the World Tree network, she could feel the blight retreating as golden green light touched infected areas, but the process was agonizingly slow. Children who never asked to be caught between worlds. Families just trying to survive. Spare me your human sentimentality, Magnus sneered. I've lived for 3,000 years, little hybrid. I've seen what happens when the barriers between worlds weaken. Chaos, war, the destruction of everything we've built. You mean the destruction of your control, Kale said, his voice steady despite the arrows now falling around them like deadly rain. The summer court soldiers had them surrounded, but they couldn't enter the ritual circle, yet. You're afraid of a world where power is shared instead of hoarded. Magnus's laugh was like breaking glass. Kale Thornwick, the prince who started this mess with his arrogance and idealism. He gestured, and ice began to form around the ritual circle, creeping inward inch by inch. Tell me, nephew, Was she worth destroying 2 worlds for? She's not destroying anything. Kale's mental voice was fierce with pride as he looked at Lyra. She's healing it. Can't you feel it, Magnus? The blight is retreating. The connections between worlds are growing stronger, not weaker. Through their joined consciousness, Lyra felt the exact moment Magnus realized what they were actually doing. His rage hit them like a physical blow, and the ice around the circle began to crack and reform, creating pressure that made her ears pop. "You fools," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you're unleashing? When the barriers fall completely, when magic flows freely between realms again, do you think your precious humans will welcome us with open arms? Some will, some won't," Lyra said, sweat beading on her forehead as she fought to maintain the healing flow. Just like some fae want to live in harmony, and others want to conquer and control. The difference is, we're giving both sides the choice. "Choice leads to chaos," Magnus said, and now he was walking forward, each step causing frost to spread across the ground. "Order requires a firm hand. Order built on fear and genocide isn't order," Nyx said, their voice carrying a power that made the very air shimmer. "It's tyranny dressed up in pretty words." Magnus raised his hand, and Lyra felt the temperature plummet. Ice began to form on her skin, and she realized with growing horror that he was trying to freeze them in place, to stop the ritual by making it impossible for them to maintain the physical connection. "Last chance," he said. "Stop this working. Return to your proper places, and I might let you live." "No," Lyra said simply. "No," Kale echoed. "No," Nyx finished, and their voice carried the weight of a crown refused, of power willingly sacrificed for principle. Magnus's expression shifted from cold amusement to something far more dangerous. "Then you've chosen death. All of you, and everyone you're trying to save." He gestured to his forces. "Kill them. Slowly." But as the soldiers charged forward, something extraordinary happened. The golden-green light of the healing energy suddenly flared brighter, and Lyra felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with her own magic. Through the World Tree network, she could feel them. Dozens, then hundreds of people responding to the healing light. Other hybrids, awakening to their full power. Sympathetic fae from all courts, adding their strength to the working. Humans who had always suspected magic was real, now able to see and touch the connections between all living things. "Do you feel that?" she whispered in wonder. "A network," Kale breathed. "Not just the 3 of us anymore. Everyone who wants to help. Everyone who chooses healing over harm. Everyone who chooses love over fear," Nyx added, and their voice was soft with amazement. The charging soldiers hit an invisible wall, not of force, but of collective will. Hundreds of minds united in a single purpose. Protect the healers. Allow the work to continue. Magnus staggered backward, his ice crown cracking as power he couldn't control or understand washed over him. "Impossible," he snarled. "This level of cooperation, this unity, it's impossible." "Maybe in your world," Lyra said, the healing energy now flowing like a river in flood, washing away decades of accumulated blight with each passing moment. "But we're building a new one." The healing wave crested like a tsunami of living light, and Lyra felt the moment it reached the heart of the blight. The ancient infection writhed and fought, but it was no match for the combined will of hundreds of awakened souls. Through the network, she experienced each victory. A withered forest blooming again in Scotland. A dying river in Japan running clear and pure. Hybrid children across the world suddenly able to breathe freely as the magic in their blood stopped fighting itself. But the power required was immense, and she could feel it draining from her like blood from an open wound. "I can't hold it much longer," she gasped aloud, her hands trembling where they gripped Kale and Nyx. "You're not meant to hold it alone." Kale's mental voice was gentle but firm. Through their connection, she felt him reaching deeper into his own reserves, offering everything he had to sustain the working. "That's what the joining is for. Sharing the burden. And sharing the cost," Nyx added, but their mental tone carried acceptance rather than fear. Through their joined consciousness, Lyra could see what they'd already realized. Completing the healing would require more power than any of them possessed individually. It would require sacrifice. Magnus, meanwhile, was rallying his forces for another assault. The network of allies had stunned him, but not stopped him, and now he was drawing power from some deeper source, something that made the air around him crack with dangerous energy. If I cannot stop this working, his voice boomed across the clearing, then I will corrupt it. Your precious healing will become a plague that destroys everything it touches. He raised both hands, and Lyra felt something dark and oily begin to seep into the golden green light. Not blight, something worse. A perversion of healing energy that would turn growth into cancer, connection into possession, love into obsession. No, she whispered, horror flooding through her. He's going to turn our cure into something that destroys both worlds. Not if we stop him first, Kale said grimly. We can't break the connection, Nyx warned. If we stop the healing now, while the blight is only partially cleared, it will return stronger than ever. Then we don't break the connection, Lyra said, understanding flooding through her like cold water. We change it. Through the World Tree Network, she reached out to every awakened hybrid, every sympathetic fae, every human who had chosen to help. I need you to understand something, she said, her mental voice carrying to hundreds of minds across both worlds. What we're doing here, it's not just healing the blight. It's rewriting the fundamental laws that govern how our worlds interact. We're choosing integration over separation, cooperation over domination. And that choice, Kale continued, understanding her plan immediately, requires someone to anchor it permanently. Someone has to stay connected to the network forever, maintaining the balance. It should be me, Nyx said immediately. I'm dying anyway. Let my death have meaning. No, Lyra said firmly. It should be all of us. Together, the way it was always meant to be. The idea crystallized as she spoke it. Not death, but transformation. Instead of one person sacrificing themselves to maintain the network, the three of them could merge permanently with the World Tree itself, becoming guardians of the balance between realms. They would lose their individual forms, but they would gain something greater, the ability to nurture and protect the connection between worlds for as long as magic existed. You're talking about giving up everything we are, Kale said quietly. I'm talking about becoming everything we could be, Lyra replied. Together, forever, in a way your curse could never prevent. She felt his wonder through their mental link, followed immediately by fierce joy. To touch you, hold you, love you without fear of harm, even if it's not in bodies of flesh and bone. To be part of something larger than ourselves, Nyx added, their mental voice filled with longing. To finally belong somewhere completely. Magnus's corruption was spreading through the healing light now, turning gold-green to sickly yellow-brown. Time was running out. Choose now, Lyra said. All of us together, or we lose everything. Together, Kale said without hesitation. Together, Nyx echoed. Then let's become legend. They opened themselves completely to the World Tree's vast consciousness, letting their individual selves dissolve into something immeasurably larger. Lyra felt her body begin to change, bark growing over skin, roots extending from her feet into the earth below. But instead of fear, she felt only peace. Through the network, she could sense Kale and Nyx undergoing the same transformation, becoming part of the living bridge between worlds. Magnus's scream of rage echoed across dimensions as his corruption hit their transformed selves and simply passed through them. You cannot corrupt a force of nature. You cannot poison the very concept of growth and healing. The blight died in a cascade of golden light, and the barriers between worlds softened into permeable membranes that would allow controlled, peaceful contact between realms. Consciousness returned slowly, like sunrise through morning fog. Lyra's first awareness was of vastness. Her sense of self now encompassed not just her own thoughts and feelings, but the entire network of life that connected both worlds. She could feel the contentment of a redwood forest in California, the quick, bright joy of cherry blossoms in Japan, the patient endurance of ancient oaks in England, and threading through it all, like silver and gold wire through green tapestry, the familiar presence of Kale and Nyx. Are we dead? Nyx's mental voice carried wonder rather than fear. We're more alive than we've ever been, Kale replied, his consciousness warm against theirs like sunlight on leaves. Lyra tried to look down at herself and realized the concept no longer had meaning. She existed everywhere and nowhere, in every plant that grew, every seed that sprouted, every moment of connection between living things. But when she focused, when she truly wanted to see, she found she could create a form, Not flesh and blood, but something made of starlight and chlorophyll, root systems and flower petals, more real than reality. Around them, the ritual circle had transformed into something that belonged in fairy tales. Where they had stood, 3 trees now grew in a perfect triangle: an oak with leaves of amber and gold, kale, a pine with needles that sparkled like silver stars, Nyx, and in the center, something that had never existed before, a tree whose trunk spiraled with flowering vines, whose leaves changed color with the seasons of both worlds, whose roots dove so deep they touched the molten heart of the earth, herself. Magnus stood at the edge of this impossible garden, his army frozen in place behind him. The Winter Lord's face cycled through expressions: rage, disbelief, and finally something that might have been grief. "What have you done?" he whispered. "What you could never understand." Lyra's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, carried on wind that smelled of every flower that had ever bloomed. "We chose to become the connection instead of controlling it. You've made yourselves into living symbols," Magnus said, and his voice held a strange kind of awe. "Guardians of the balance between worlds. But at what cost? You're no longer truly human, no longer truly Fae. You're something else entirely." "Something new," Kale agreed, his presence radiating warmth that made flowers bloom out of season. "Something that couldn't exist before because no one had ever been brave enough to trust completely." Through the network, they could feel the effects of their transformation rippling outward. The blight was gone, not just contained or diminished, but erased from existence, unable to take root in a system strengthened by perfect cooperation. Hybrid children who had hidden their gifts their entire lives were stepping into sunlight, their powers stabilized and safe. Fae nobles who had never set foot in the human world were carefully, curiously, beginning to explore. But more than that, the fundamental nature of magic itself was changing. No longer the hoarded resource of a privileged few, it was becoming available to anyone who approached it with genuine love and respect for life. Doctors whose healing touch now carried literal power. Gardeners whose plants thrived in impossible conditions. Musicians whose songs could mend broken hearts not just metaphorically, but literally. "You've changed everything," Magnus said, and now his voice definitely held grief. "The old ways, the ancient structures, the careful balance I've maintained for millennia, all of it is meaningless now." Not meaningless. Nyx's consciousness brushed against their father's mind with surprising gentleness. Evolved. The structure you built kept both worlds safe when they weren't ready for contact. But now they are ready. Now they can grow together instead of apart. For a long moment, Magnus stood silent. Then slowly, he removed his crown of black ice and let it fall to the ground, where it melted into water that nourished the new growth already sprouting around their tree forms. "I am very old," he said finally, "and very tired of being afraid." "Then stop," Lyra said softly. "Stop being afraid. Help us instead of fighting us. There's room in this new world for everyone, even Winter Lords who've forgotten how to trust." Magnus looked up at their impossible garden, at his child now transformed into something beautiful and eternal, at the evidence of healing spreading across both worlds. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it's time for this old king to learn new ways of ruling." He turned to address his army, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Stand down, all of you. The war is over, not because we've won or lost, but because the very concept of war between our peoples has become obsolete." "And the Summer Court?" one of his generals asked uncertainly. "Will adapt or become irrelevant," Magnus said with a slight smile. "Change has a way of making itself inevitable." As his forces began to disperse, Magnus approached their tree circle once more. "My child," he said to Nyx, "I am proud of you. It took courage I never possessed to choose transformation over preservation." "You could choose it too," Nyx replied. "It's never too late to grow." Magnus nodded slowly. "Perhaps I will. When I'm ready." He looked up at the impossible garden that was now their physical form. "What will you call yourselves? What are you now?" Lyra felt Kale and Nyx's presence intertwining with her own, 3 consciousness becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. "We are the gardeners," she said simply. "We tend the connections that let impossible things bloom." 6 months after the transformation, the world had settled into patterns that would have seemed impossible before. Lyra's consciousness drifted through the network, observing the changes with wonder that never dimmed. In Tokyo, a business district where nothing had grown for decades now featured rooftop gardens that bloomed year-round, tended by office workers who discovered they had the gift for coaxing life from concrete and steel. In the Amazon, areas that had been clear-cut were regenerating at impossible speed, guided by indigenous shamans working alongside fey nature spirits who no longer had to hide their existence. Look at this. Kale's presence focused her attention on a small town in Montana, where a previously failing farm was now producing crops that could grow in any climate, feed more people with less space, and actively cleaned the soil they grew in. The farmer's daughter is half-spring court. She never knew why she could make things grow until now. And look at this, Nix added, their consciousness touching a university in England, where the first department of interdimensional studies had just been established. Humans and Fae learning together, sharing knowledge that neither could develop alone. Through their tree forms in the sacred grove, they could also perceive the physical changes. The circle of stones where they had performed the joining ritual had become a pilgrimage site, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of worshippers or tourists, it drew healers. People came from both worlds to learn, to share knowledge, to work together on problems that transcended any single realm. Magnus had become a frequent visitor, his winter-pale hair now streaked with silver that wasn't entirely from age. He'd stepped down as absolute ruler of his court, establishing instead a council that included voices from both Fae and hybrid communities. "I never thought I'd say this," he'd admitted during his last visit, "but democracy is far more interesting than tyranny. More complicated, but infinitely more alive." Today's visitors were special, though. A young couple approached the grove, their hands clasped tightly together, their auras bright with new love and old fear. The man was clearly human, brown skin, calloused hands that spoke of honest work, eyes that held wonder but no magic. The woman beside him was just as clearly Fae, though she'd hidden it well enough to live in the human world for years. Her ears came to delicate points, her hair shifted color subtly in the sunlight, and her every movement had the fluid grace of someone who'd never quite gotten used to human gravity. "They're afraid," Lyra observed, feeling their emotional turmoil like a discordant note in the grove's harmony. "She's pregnant, and they don't know what their child will be, or if it will survive," Kale added grimly. Before the joining, hybrid pregnancies had been dangerous, the conflicting magics often causing miscarriage or birth defects. "Should we?" Nix began. "Yes," Lyra said immediately. "If they're brave enough to come here, they deserve answers." She manifested her starlight and chlorophyll form, appearing as a woman made of living light with flowers in her hair and bark-patterned skin. The couple startled, then slowly approached. "You're one of them, aren't you?" the woman asked. "One of the gardeners." "I'm Dr. Lyra Chen," she said gently. "Or I was, before I chose something different." "What are your names?" "Maria Santos," the woman replied. "And this is James. We're having a baby. And you're worried about what that baby will be," Lyra said with infinite compassion. "I understand that fear." James spoke for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. "The doctors don't know what to tell us. Human medicine can't predict what happens when our kinds... when you love each other completely?" Kale materialized beside Lyra, his form carved from amber light and autumn leaves. "Love isn't a problem to be solved, James. It's a miracle to be celebrated. But our baby," Maria began, "will be perfect exactly as they are," Nick said, appearing as silver starlight and pine needles. "The old conflicts between human and Fae magic no longer exist. Your child will be born into a world where hybrid gifts are sources of strength, not danger." To demonstrate, Lyra reached out through the network to touch the tiny consciousness growing within Maria's womb. What she found made her gasp with joy. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, they're beautiful." "They?" Maria asked. "Twins," Lyra said with a smile that made flowers bloom at her feet. "A boy who will have his father's gift for fixing things and his mother's ability to sing magic into being. A girl who will be able to heal with her touch and grow things that have never existed before." She paused. "And they will be born healthy, strong, and surrounded by more love than any child has ever known." Maria burst into tears of relief, and James wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you for showing us we don't have to be afraid anymore. Fear has its place, Kale said gently. It keeps us safe, makes us careful. But it should never stop us from loving or hoping or creating new life. As the couple walked away, hands clasped and hearts light, Lyra felt a deep satisfaction settle into her transformed consciousness. This is what we chose, she murmured to her partners. Not just to heal the blight, but to make room for all the impossible things that love can create. Speaking of impossible things, Nick said with amusement coloring their mental voice, we have another visitor. Approaching the grove was a figure Lyra recognized immediately, even though she looked nothing like the ambitious graduate student who had started this journey. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, her former research partner, now carried herself with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. Behind her walked a class of students, some human, some fae, some obviously hybrid, all taking notes on tablets that somehow recorded not just words, but the emotional resonance of what they were learning. The first interdimensional botanical survey, Sarah called out cheerfully. We're documenting the new species that have emerged since the joining. Care to give us the expert perspective? Lyra laughed, the sound like wind chimes and bird song. I'd be delighted to. 1 year had passed since the joining, and the world, both worlds, hummed with life in ways that would have been unimaginable before. From her perspective as part of the World Tree Network, Lyra could perceive the intricate web of connections that now spanned dimensions. Every garden, every forest, every single flower blooming in a window box was part of a living tapestry that pulsed with shared consciousness and infinite possibility. Look, Kale's presence drew her attention to a scene that made her heart sing. In the original greenhouse where this had all begun, now expanded into a sprawling botanical research center, children were learning to tend impossible plants. Not just hybrid children, but human and fae youngsters working side by side, their different gifts complementing each other perfectly. A little girl with pointed ears was showing a human boy how to encourage a moonflower to bloom by singing to it in the old language. In return, he was teaching her how to use careful measurement and scientific observation to create the perfect growing conditions. Behind them, their teacher, a middle-aged woman whose aura marked her as one of the newly awakened hybrids, watched with the same expression of wonder that Lyra remembered from her grandmother's face. The next generation won't even think it's strange, Nix observed, their mental voice warm with contentment. To them, this is just how the world works. As it should be, Lyra agreed. Through the network, she could sense similar scenes playing out across the globe. In New Zealand, Maori elders were teaching young fae about the spiritual connections between land and people. In Scotland, traditional Celtic druids were learning advanced magical theory from autumn court scholars. In Brazil, indigenous shamans were collaborating with spring court healers to develop new treatments for diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. But perhaps most remarkably, the changes weren't limited to the obvious magical applications. The fundamental shift in consciousness, the acceptance that cooperation produced better results than competition, was transforming everything. Global conflicts were being resolved through negotiation, aided by empaths who could help all parties understand each other's true needs. Environmental restoration projects were succeeding beyond all expectations as humans, fae, and hybrids worked together to heal damage that had taken centuries to create. We did something beautiful, Kale said softly, his consciousness intertwining with theirs in the way that had become natural as breathing. Not just the healing, but this, all of it. A new presence approached their grove, familiar, beloved, but somehow different. Magnus walked between their trees with a lightness in his step that spoke of burdens finally set down. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a woman Lyra recognized from the network's memories, Titania, the former Summer Queen, her golden hair now streaked with silver that matched Magnus's, her fierce pride tempered by hard-won wisdom. And here I thought this day couldn't get more interesting, Nix murmured with amusement. My lords and lady, Magnus said formally, though his eyes twinkled with humor. We come to seek your blessing. Our blessing. Lyra manifested her light form, curiosity bright in her expression. For what? Titania stepped forward, and her smile was radiant as summer sunrise. For a wedding, she said simply. It seems that former enemies who find themselves working toward the same goals sometimes discover they have more in common than they ever imagined. You're getting married? Kale appeared beside Lyra, his autumn-touched form radiating warmth and delight. After 3,000 years of cold war between your courts? After 3,000 years of letting fear and pride keep us apart, Magnus corrected. We've discovered that peace negotiations are far more pleasant when conducted over dinner. And dinner led to dancing, and dancing led to, well, he took Titania's hand, and the simple gesture sent ripples of contentment through the grove. We want to hold the ceremony here, Titania explained, where the transformation began, where 3 people chose love over fear and changed the fate of all worlds. It would be our honor, Lyra said, and meant it completely. Through the network, she could already sense the reactions to this news. Surprise, delight, and most importantly, hope. If the Winter King and Summer Queen could find love after millennia of conflict, what other impossible things might be possible? The wedding, when it took place 3 months later, was everything a union between seasons should be. Winter's precision and summer's abundance combined to create something unprecedented, a celebration that honored the past while embracing the future. Representatives from all courts attended, along with human dignitaries, hybrid families, and anyone else who wanted to witness love triumphing over ancient grudges. As the ceremony concluded with Magnus and Titania's vows spoken beneath the intertwined branches of the 3 guardian trees, Lyra felt a deep peace settle into her transformed consciousness. Is this what happiness feels like? She asked her partners. This sense of completeness, of everything being exactly as it should be. I think it's more than happiness, Kyle replied, his presence warm with contentment. I think it's fulfillment. The knowledge that we chose well, that our sacrifice became something beautiful. And it's not an ending, Nyx added. It's a beginning. There will always be new challenges, new conflicts to resolve, new impossible things to nurture. But now the foundation is strong enough to support whatever comes. As if summoned by their conversation, a new presence approached the grove. A young man Lyra didn't recognize, but whose aura blazed with untrained power and desperate hope. Behind him walked a woman whose bearing marked her as fey nobility, though her clothes were travel-stained and her face etched with worry. Another story beginning, Lyra observed with satisfaction. Should we? Kale began. Always, she replied. We're the gardeners. It's what we do. She manifested her form once more, starlight and flowers and infinite compassion, ready to listen to whatever impossible problem these 2 brought to her grove. Behind them, she sensed others approaching. More couples facing the challenges of love across species lines. More children discovering gifts they didn't understand. More communities learning to bridge differences they'd thought insurmountable. Welcome, she said to the newcomers, her voice carrying all the warmth of spring rain and summer sunshine. Tell us your story. We're here to help impossible things bloom. And in the distance, carried on wind that smelled of every flower that had ever existed, and some that were yet to be discovered, came the sound of the world growing. They say that love can move mountains, but Lyra Chen, Kale Thornwick, and Nyx Shadowthorn proved that love can do something far more extraordinary. It can grow bridges where walls once stood, plant hope where despair had taken root, and nurture impossible things until they become as natural as breathing. Their story reminds us that transformation always requires risk, that healing sometimes demands sacrifice, and that the most powerful magic of all is the choice to trust completely, love freely, and believe that even the most broken things can bloom again. In gardens around the world, both in our realm and the ones beyond our sight, their legacy continues to grow. Every hybrid child who no longer has to hide their gifts. Every impossible flower that blooms in defiance of nature's supposed laws. Every moment when someone chooses cooperation over competition, understanding over judgment, love over fear. The Garden of Thorns and Starlight may have begun as one woman's greenhouse, but it became something infinite, a symbol of what becomes possible when we tend the connections between all living things with patience, wisdom, and hope. And somewhere, in the space between heartbeats, between raindrops, between the moment a seed breaks open and the moment it reaches toward the sun, 3 guardians continue their work, ensuring that impossible things always have a place to take root and grow. Because in the end, love doesn't just conquer all, it transforms everything it touches into something more beautiful than we ever dared imagine.